You're not living up to your potential. Those words hang over so many people with ADHD. They're tormented by the shame of not achieving what their parents or their teachers wanted for them. Or they're trying so hard to live up to some ideal that they sacrifice their health and their happiness. Either way, this idea that you're not living up to your potential can be a toxic inner monologue that influences work, relationships, and self esteem. So, today, let's unpack how this narrative derails folks with ADHD and learn some strategies to rewrite the stories that we tell ourselves about what we can and can't achieve. This is ADHD where we talk about everyday life and ADHD. I'm your host, Dr. J. I'm a licensed psychologist who works with those with ADHD. If you feel haunted by the idea of living up to your potential, this one's for you. In my work, I tend to see this potential struggle show up in two pretty distinct ways. And even though they look completely different on the outside, they're usually carrying the same thing underneath. The first type is the person who was told early on that certain goals were simply out of reach for them. Maybe their gifts were overlooked. Maybe they heard, "You're smart, but you don't really apply yourself," so many times that it became background noise. These are the people that eventually stopped trying, not because they didn't care, but because trying and failing in front of everyone was too painful. So they checked out, and that protective strategy was labeled as laziness when it was really armor. The second type looks completely different on the surface. These are the high achievers, the ones with the color-coded planners, the immaculate track records, the reputation for always having it together. But behind that carefully curated exterior, absolute exhaustion, because that together look didn't come naturally. It came from holding themselves to impossible standards just to mask what was happening underneath. Here's where the research gets interesting. Studies on ADHD and perfectionism find that people with ADHD score notably high on things like concerns over mistakes and doubting their own actions. These are what researchers call maladaptive perfectionism traits. But they don't score high on the organizational elements that are also a part of the clinical definition, which means a lot of what we're calling perfectionism and ADHD is actually anxiety about being found out. It's not, "I want everything to be perfect." It's, "If I'm not perfect, people will see how broken I am." And for women, this plays out in a particularly specific way. ADHD is diagnosed 3 times more often in boys than girls in childhood. But by adulthood, the ratio evens out to roughly 1-to-1, which means a huge number of women spent years, sometimes decades, struggling without diagnosis, without language for what's happening, and without support. And they compensated, they masked, they overachieved, or they checked out. And in both cases, they internalized the message that something was fundamentally wrong with them. The inner monologue for both ends up sounding the same. "I'm not good enough. I'm not doing enough. I am, at my core, a disappointment." Here's the painful part, as if everything up until this point hasn't already been painful. Life has a way of providing what feels like evidence for that narrative, especially if ADHD goes unmanaged or undiagnosed. The employment data alone is sobering. Adults with ADHD are 60% more likely to be fired from a job and 3 times more likely to quit a job impulsively. One longitudinal study found that childhood ADHD is associated with roughly a 33% reduction in earnings in adulthood, figures that are larger than many estimates of the gender wage gap. We're also losing, on average, 20 days of productive work per year to ADHD-related difficulties. Now, I'm not sharing those numbers to spiral anyone. I'm sharing them because they explain something important. The shame that people with ADHD carry about their work performance isn't purely psychological. It's been reinforced over and over by real-world outcomes that felt like personal failures, but were actually symptoms of an unmanaged neurological condition. Add to that a sense of never quite launching, watching peers hit milestones while you feel stuck, and for the perfectionists, the burnout that hits when you spent years running on adrenaline and impossible standards. That shame accumulates, and it starts to feel like proof. But here's what I want you to hold on to. It was never proof of who you are. It was information about what you needed. So how do we actually change this? Let me walk you through a few things that I genuinely find helpful, both from my clinical work and from the research. Number one, understand your brain first. You cannot have compassion for something you don't understand. And self-compassion, and I mean real, sustainable self-compassion, is not about telling yourself nice things while you are secretly believing that you and your entire life is a disaster. It's about actually reconceptualizing what has been happening in your brain. Research is increasingly clear that self-compassion isn't the enemy of accountability. It actually strengthens it. When you're not spending all of your energy managing shame, you have more capacity to problem solve, to persist, and to try again after a setback. One recent study found that self-compassion was directly linked to what researchers call value-based behavior, meaning that when people are kinder to themselves, they're actually more likely to act in alignment with what matters to them, not less. So learning about your ADHD, really learning about it, is the foundation. What subtype are you? How does it show up specifically for you? Because ADHD looks different across the board. Someone with predominantly inattentive presentation might internalize a lot. The daydreaming, the missed deadlines, the where did that last hour go? They get labeled as checked out. Someone with hyperactive or combined type might get labeled as disruptive, impulsive, or too much. These are different experiences that produce different shame stories. Understanding your specific experience of ADHD is how you start to challenge the narrative that was written about you by people that don't have the full picture. Number two, mindfulness. And I know you've heard this, but stay with me. Mindfulness gets recommended so often for ADHD that it almost stops meaning anything. But the research here is real. Mindfulness-based interventions for ADHD show meaningful improvements in self-compassion, emotional well-being, and importantly to this topic, the ability to observe your thoughts without immediately fusing with them. That inner monologue that says, I'm not good enough, mindfulness doesn't make it go away. What it does is give you a little bit of distance from it. You start to see it as a thought, something your brain is producing, rather than a truth about who you are. And that gap, even a small one, is where the magic happens. Number three is to get honest about whose goals you're actually carrying. This is the one that tends to land hard in the therapy room. When I ask someone, what does living up to your potential really mean to you? They often pause for a long time because when they really dig into it, the goal that they've been killing themselves for isn't really theirs. It belonged to a parent, a teacher, a culture that equates worth with productivity, but it's not theirs. So I want you to ask yourself, what do you actually want? Not what would make people stop worrying about you, not what would finally prove the critics wrong. What would make you feel like your life has meaning? For a lot of ADHD people, that answer involves creativity, connection, variety, or impact, not necessarily a linear career path or a particular title or income level. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's not settling, that's alignment. Number four, here's where I want you to hold two truths at once, because I think the conversation about goals and ADHD needs to be honest in both directions. On one hand, yes, your goals are valid. Your ambitions are real. You don't have to shrink what you want to fit what other people decided was possible for you. I've seen people with ADHD do extraordinary things, and I will not be the person sitting here telling you to lower the bar. And also, the plan matters. A dream without a structure that actually works with your brain, not against it, is just a source of ongoing shame. So if you have a big goal, the question isn't, is this realistic for someone like me? The question is, have I broken this down into steps small enough that my brain can actually execute them? Do I have the right support? Am I building in flexibility for the hard days, not as an afterthought, but from the start? Being realistic isn't about the destination. It's about the path. And for ADHD brains, that path needs to look different. Smaller steps, more checkpoints. Flexibility built in, not bolted on after you're already burned out. Number five, unmask, at least with some people. This one is hard because it requires trust that not everyone has been given reason to have. But isolation is one of the biggest accelerants of shame. When you're carrying this secretly, the missed deadlines, the impulsivity, the feeling of being 3 steps behind everyone else, it festers. It becomes your whole identity. Finding even one or two people you can be honest with, whether that's a therapist, a trusted friend, or a community of other ADHD people, changes something. Because when you say it out loud and someone responds with, "Me too," the story shifts from "this is who I am" to "this is something that we can navigate together." Here's the thing about potential. It was always meant to be a launching pad, not a ceiling that you're constantly failing to reach. And who gets to define it? Spoiler alert, it's you. Not the teacher who said, "if you only applied yourself," not the job who let you go, not the version of productivity that was designed for a neurotypical world. You get to decide what a meaningful life looks like. And the goal isn't to perform success for other people, it's to build something that actually fits your brain, your values, and your version of thriving. That's it for this episode of ADHD And. If you want to go deeper on some of what we covered today, check out our episode on ADHD and burnout, because a lot of what I described today, that exhaustion from performing potential, is exactly where burnout comes from. Thanks so much for tuning in. Subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. And let me know in the comments what your definition of success is.